Have you ever wondered, are you really the person you think you are? What if beneath your fear, your ego, and your endless need for approval, there is a version of you that you have completely forgotten? The ancient teachers believed our greatest problem was never ignorance. It was forgetting who we truly are. And awakening doesn't mean becoming someone new. It means remembering what you have always been. This is the journey back to yourself. The Forgotten Self. Part 1. The Tragedy of Forgetting. The oldest teachers of humanity agreed on one strange idea. Our deepest problem was never poverty, or ignorance, or even suffering itself. Our deepest problem is that we forgot who we are. The moment that memory slips away, we start living as someone else, chasing approval, running from stillness, mistaking noise for meaning. Every fear, every endless chase for approval, every quiet sense that something is missing, seems to trace back to the same ancient mistake, forgetting our true nature. Two people can stand under the same sky, face the same hardship, and walk away with entirely different lives. Not because the world was different, but because the mind meeting it was. A frightened mind can find misery in paradise. An awakened mind can find peace inside a storm. This is not a story about becoming something greater than you already are. It is about remembering what you have always been. The wisest men and women across history believed that awakening was never new information. It was recovered memory. And once that memory starts to return, the world never looks quite the same again. Part 2. The layers that cover us. Imagine an old statue buried under centuries of dust. No sculptor invents a new masterpiece. From it, he simply clears away what was never truly part of the stone. Human beings carry the same kind of hidden self, buried beneath layers built over a lifetime. Ancient teachers described awakening this way, not as collecting new knowledge, but as removing veils that we're never who we truly are. Fear is the first layer. It once kept our ancestors alive, warning them of real danger. Left unchecked, it becomes a quiet warden, whispering that change is unsafe, that truth is dangerous, that growth should wait for another day. A life ruled by fear slowly forgets its own courage. Pride is the second. It wears the mask of strength while quietly blocking the door to learning. Those who believe they already know everything rarely discover anything new. Socrates said, "Wisdom begins the moment we admit how little we truly know." Humility does not diminish greatness, it prepares the ground for it. Desire is the third. It is not the enemy, it drives creation, exploration, and ambition. But left uncontrolled, it convinces us that fulfillment always lives somewhere else, in the next achievement, the next possession, the next victory. The heart forgets that lasting contentment begins within, long before it ever appears without. Distraction is the fourth, and perhaps no generation has drowned in it more than ours. Endless information fills the mind while leaving little room for reflection. The ancients withdrew into deserts and mountains, not because they hated the world, but because silence revealed truths that constant activity concealed. Comparison is the fifth. A tree never measures itself against the mountain. A river never envies the stars. Yet, we surrender our peace by measuring our path against someone else's. And in doing so, we lose sight of our own calling. Attachment is the sixth. It convinces us our identity depends on things that do not last. Status, wealth, relationships, opinions. But everything visible eventually changes. Empires collapse. Wealth disappears. Beauty fades. If our sense of self depends on temporary things, suffering becomes inevitable. Freedom begins when we learn to enjoy life without letting it define us. And the seventh, the deepest layer, is forgetfulness itself, not forgetting facts, but forgetting our own original nature. The inner spark becomes buried beneath years of habit until we mistake the mask for the face. We stop asking who we are and start asking only what we must become to be accepted. The old teachers believed this final layer was the hidden root from which every other layer grew. Every layer that covers us can be loosened. Fear can be observed. Pride can be softened. Desire can be guided. Distraction can be quieted. Comparison released. Attachment loosened. And forgetting can become remembering. Beneath every layer waits the same silent truth that Socrates sought and generations of seekers carried forward. The self we search for was never truly lost. It has only been waiting to be remembered. Part 3. The secret inside every human. The Greek philosopher Hermes Trismegistus described the human mind as a mirror of something larger, a reflection of the same intelligence that shapes the universe. Socrates pointed the same direction with his command, "Know thyself." Centuries later, Epictetus, a man born into slavery, reminded his students that no tyrant could ever enslave someone who had mastered their own inner kingdom. Though separated by centuries and cultures, these teachers guarded one timeless secret. The greatest discovery a person could make was never hidden in the outer world, but within. Picture a young traveler who crosses rivers and mountains to find a legendary sage, believing the old master holds the secret to happiness. After weeks of hardship, he finally reaches a quiet stone sanctuary. "I have traveled the world," he declares. "Teach me the greatest secret." Instead of answering, the sage hands him a polished bronze mirror. The traveler stares at his own reflection, confused. "I did not climb mountains to look at myself," he protests. The sage answers softly, "That is why your journey is not yet finished." The young man had expected hidden scrolls or secret rituals. Instead, he was invited into the hardest pilgrimage of all, the journey inward. This is the condition of humanity itself. We collect possessions, titles, and opinions, believing each new acquisition will finally complete us. Yet the more we gather, the emptier many of us feel. The ancients understood this paradox. Forgetting the self creates a hunger no external success can ever satisfy. Part 4. Living between heaven and earth. Many assume the spiritual life only begins once we withdraw from ordinary responsibilities, that enlightenment belongs only to mountain, caves, or hidden temples. But the wisest teachers kept returning to the marketplace, because wisdom only proves itself. In daily life, a young apprentice once traveled far to study under a renowned philosopher, expecting secret ceremonies. Instead, he found the old man tending a neglected garden, mending broken pottery, and sharing simple meals with strangers. Weeks became months, with no ceremony at all. Finally, the apprentice asked, "When will you reveal the sacred teachings?" The old man planted another seed and said, "I have been revealing them every day. I have only seen ordinary work." The apprentice replied, "Exactly." The master said. That evening, watching the sun disappear behind the hills, the teacher added, "The divine mind hides itself inside ordinary moments, because proud people search only for extraordinary ones." The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men of his age, wrote each morning, that his highest calling was simply to act today with justice, patience, humility, and reason. He never separated philosophy from leadership. Leadership became philosophy in action. Anyone can stay calm during a quiet retreat. The greater test is staying calm while facing criticism, disappointment, or financial uncertainty. Anyone can speak kindly when life unfolds as expected. True mastery is when kindness survives frustration. A quiet merchant once stood outside his shop each morning with his eyes closed. Curious neighbors assumed he prayed for prosperity. Years later, a young student finally asked him what he prayed for. "Nothing." The merchant laughed. "Then why do you stand here?" "So that, when the first difficult customer arrives, I remember who I wish to become before I remember how I wish to respond." That merchant became known not for his goods, but for the way every person who met him walked away feeling respected. Part 5. The Spark Beneath the Sleep. The Gnostic teachers spoke of humanity suffering from a peculiar kind of sleep, not of the body, but of remembrance. They believed each person carries a spark of something greater, buried under fear, ignorance, and attachment to the material world. The tragedy is not that the spark disappeared. It is that it was forgotten. A traveler once entered a temple famous for its beautifully carved outer walls, covered with images of stars, kings, and sacred birds. He spent hours admiring every detail. As the sun set, an old priest approached. "You have admired the walls," he said, "but you have not entered the sanctuary." Confused, the traveler followed him through a narrow passage into a small, almost empty, inner chamber. There was no gold, no treasure, only a single polished stone that reflected anyone who stood before it. "The longest journey any person makes," the priest whispered, "is from the eyes to the soul." An old desert elder once handed a young seeker a blackened, soot-covered oil lamp. "Clean it," he said. The young man spent the whole day polishing it until the metal shone brilliantly. That evening the elder lit the wick, and the room filled with light. "It burns beautifully now," the young man said. The elder smiled. The flame was always capable of shining. It only needed the soot removed. So it is with every human soul. Fear may cover the spark. Pride may conceal it. Distraction may silence it. Yet none of these can ever extinguish it. Part 6. 7 Keys to Awakening. Every great tradition offered its own version of the same 7 keys, believing the human spirit holds hidden chambers that reveal themselves only through disciplined living. Awareness is the first key. The mind shapes experience, and most suffering begins long before pain itself. The moment the mind reacts automatically instead of consciously. Several times a day, pausing to take one breath and ask, "What is truly happening within me?" loosens the grip of unconscious living. Silence is the second. The ancients retreated to deserts, not because they hated people, but because truth speaks softly. And today's deserts are made of endless notifications and noise, rather than sand. A still lake reflects the sky without distortion. A still mind reflects deeper truths the same way. Discernment is the third. The discipline of asking, "Is this true? Does this lead toward wisdom? And who benefits from my believing it?" Not everything repeated often becomes true. Courage is the fourth. No true transformation happens without leaving something familiar behind. Every authentic journey begins with a difficult departure. Fear promises safety. Courage promises growth. It is not the absence of fear, but the decision that truth matters more than comfort. Compassion is the fifth. It is not softness, but strength. The Shift from asking, why are they difficult, to what unseen burden might they carry? Most people hunger less for advice than for genuine presence. Truth is the sixth. It rarely flatters, and it often demands change, because illusion protects ego, while truth reshapes it. The stories we repeat about ourselves eventually become invisible prisons, unless we question them. Asking, what uncomfortable truth am I avoiding, carries remarkable power, and presence is the seventh, gathering all the others together. Without awareness, it cannot exist. Without silence, it cannot deepen. Without courage, it stays superficial. Presence means inhabiting this single moment fully. When eating, simply eating. When listening, truly listening, rather than living in yesterday's regret or tomorrow's worry. Part 7. The mask is not the face. From childhood, identity accumulates like layers of clothing. A name, a family, a career, a reputation. Each layer serves a purpose, but none fully defines the person underneath. The danger begins when we mistake the mask for the face. Much of what we call personality consists of habits learned for acceptance, survival, or protection. A child praised only for achievement may grow into an adult who believes love must always be earned. These strategies become so familiar over time that they start to feel like identity itself. Yet they are only habits, not essence. Imagine an actor who plays the same role every night for 40 years. The same costume, the same lines, the same applause. One evening, a young admirer asks, "Who are you?" When the curtain falls, the old actor realizes, for the first time in decades, that he no longer knows. Many lives unfold the same way, quietly becoming a profession, a possession, a public image, a piece of suffering. The ego is not evil. It developed to organize experience and protect the individual. The trouble begins only when the servant claims the throne. Ancient wisdom never demanded destroying the ego, only placing it back in its proper seat. The rider guides the horse. The horse does not guide the rider. Instead of saying, "I am a failure," awareness gently observes, "I experienced failure." Instead of, "I am anxious," it notices, "Anxiety is visiting me." A monk once became famous for his wisdom, and pilgrims traveled great distances just to hear him speak. One evening, a visitor arrived and quietly asked, "When no one comes to hear your wisdom, who remains?" The monk had no answer. He withdrew into silence for several days, and when he returned, his disciples noticed he spoke less and smiled more. "I discovered," he finally said, "that I had begun protecting my reputation more carefully than my soul." From that day forward, he welcomed obscurity as readily as recognition. He had remembered that the mask is useful, but it is never the self. Part 8. The Prison of Perception. There is an old story of a prisoner who spent nearly 20 years inside a fortress. Visitors pitied him, certain that no man could remain hopeful under such conditions. Yet, when he was finally released, his face carried no bitterness. Asked how he survived, he smiled and said, "They imprisoned my body only after I refused to imprison my mind." Epictetus, a man who himself was born into slavery, taught one of history's most enduring lessons. It is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Between every event and every emotional reaction stands a hidden interpreter, the human mind. Two travelers can cross the same desert, one cursing the endless sand, the other marveling at the horizon, believing every step carries him toward wisdom. The landscape never changes. Only the perception does. Modern psychology now confirms what the Stoics observed through discipline alone. We rarely respond to reality exactly as it is. We respond to the meaning we assign to it. A delayed opportunity becomes proof that life is unfair. A criticism becomes evidence of worthlessness. The event lasts a moment. The interpretation can last a lifetime. Imagine a king who wears colored glass over his eyes without realizing it. Through red lenses, he sees danger everywhere. Through dark lenses, the whole palace looks lifeless and cold. His advisors cannot convince him otherwise, because he mistakes the color of the glass for the nature of reality itself. One night, while he sleeps, an old servant quietly removes the lenses. In the morning, nothing outside has changed, yet everything looks different. Reality was never distorted. Only his perception was. The habit that begins to dissolve this prison is simple. When disappointment arrives, ask what else it could mean. When fear appears, ask whether it is fact or interpretation. When anger rises, pause long enough to separate the event from the story attached to it. Slowly, awareness enters where habit once ruled, and every emotional prison reveals an invisible door. Part 9. The Forgotten Origin. Hermes Trismegistus taught that the greatest tragedy is not ignorance, but forgetfulness. That beneath the noise of daily struggle lies a deeper identity, a spark connected to the sane intelligence that shapes the stars. Knowledge, in this tradition, was never the accumulation of information. It was remembrance. Picture an eagle raised among chickens. From the day it hatches, it learns to scratch the earth and believes a short hop is the highest possible flight. And every bird around it confirms the belief. One day, an old traveler notices it staring toward distant mountains. "You were not made only for the ground," he says. The ego laughs. "I have never flown." "That proves only what you have practiced." The traveler replies. Slowly, he leads the bird to a high cliff. At first, there is only terror. Every habit argues against the leap. Then, instinct wakes. The wings unfold. What seemed impossible suddenly feels strangely familiar. The eagle does not become something new. It simply remembers what it always was. Hermetic philosophy held that the universe is fundamentally mental, not that the physical world is unreal, but that consciousness profoundly shapes human experience. Two people may stand before identical opportunities. One sees possibility, another sees inevitable failure. The outer circumstance stays the same. The inner world determines the response. An old legend tells of a young initiate who, Traveled, great, Distances, seeking a hidden chamber said to contain the wisdom of the universe. After years of pilgrimage, he reached an ancient temple and asked the guardian to reveal it. The guardian simply handed him a polished bronze mirror. "You have been carrying its entrance," the elder said, "since the day you were born." Part 10. Becoming the teaching. People rarely remember every word spoken by a wise person. They remember how they felt in that person's presence. Calmness can be contagious. Integrity can inspire without a single word. Compassion often teaches more deeply than instruction ever could. A village was once torn apart by constant disputes. Families arguing over land. Neighbors no longer trusting one another. Many scholars arrived with clever speeches and harsh laws. Yet nothing changed. Then One spring, an elderly traveler settled quietly beside the village well. He repaired broken tools without asking for payment. He answered insults with patience and praise with a simple smile and kept working. Weeks became months. Children began helping him. Merchants slowly became more honest. Neighbors began apologizing to one another. Someone finally asked the old traveler what teaching he had given the village. He laughed softly. "None," he said. "People believe their eyes far more than their ears." They watched, and then they remembered. Humility, in this light, does not mean thinking poorly of oneself. It means refusing to place the self at the center of everything. Pride believes it has already arrived. Humility keeps walking. The greatest obstacle to awakening is rarely ignorance, it is certainty. Part 11. The bridge between opposites. Fear and courage. Love and hate. Success and failure. Ancient wisdom saw these not as separate forces, but as different points on the same road, much like a small flame that warms a traveler, while an uncontrolled blaze destroys the forest. The same element brings comfort or catastrophe, depending on its intensity. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is fear carried forward into purposeful action. Often, indifference, not hatred, is love's true opposite, and what looks like anger sometimes hides grief, or what looks like pride sometimes hides insecurity. There is an old story of a young prince raised to despise a neighboring kingdom his entire childhood. In battle, he finds a wounded enemy soldier lying beneath a broken olive tree, whispering for water. The prince nearly walks away until he notices a small wooden carving around the soldier's neck, identical to one his own father once gave him as a child. Curiosity overcomes resentment. The two men speak, and the prince discovers that this enemy loves his family, fears death, laughs with friends, and dreams of peace exactly as he does. Hatred that filled his heart simply dissolves. Nothing outside had changed. The battlefield remained. The nations remained divided. Yet one illusion disappeared forever. He no longer saw an enemy. He saw another human being. Part 12. The future we are quietly building. Civilizations are remembered not only for their monuments, but for the quality of consciousness their people carried. A society filled with fearful, distracted minds can build magnificent structures while quietly collapsing from within, while another society, with far less wealth but greater wisdom, can influence humanity for centuries. An old gardener once planted walnut trees he knew he would never live to see bear fruit. Travelers stopped and laughed, asking why he bothered. "My grandfather planted trees whose fruit fed me," the gardener said without looking up. "If I refuse to plant because I will not benefit immediately, I become the generation that ends the harvest." He never argued the point further. He simply kept planting. Every kindness plants a seed someone else may inherit. Every moment of patience interrupts a cycle of anger that may have existed for generations. Every careless word becomes a seed whose harvest someone else may eventually reap. Modern science now speaks of emotional contagion, the way feelings move between people almost invisibly. But the old teachers understood this long before laboratories existed. What lives inside one heart eventually touches many others. This is how civilizations heal. Not all at once, but one conscious human being after another. Part 13. The Journey Back to Wholeness. The philosopher Plotinus taught that beneath all our differences lies a single shared source of life and light. Like sunlight passing through many colors of stained glass. The colors differ. The light remains one. Cultures differ. Languages differ. Personalities differ. But the light giving life to each person comes from the same mysterious source. A sculptor in ancient Alexandria was once asked by his apprentice why he sat silently for hours before touching his marble. "I am not deciding what to create," the old man said. "I am listening for what wishes to emerge." Day after day, the apprentice watched this strange practice until, one morning, a finished statue stood before them. "How did you know it was hidden inside?" the apprentice asked in wonder. The sculptor answered simply, "I removed everything that was not the statue." Awakening, Plotinus believed, works the same way, less about adding something new, and more about removing everything false. Pride, fear, the illusion of separation. What remains has always been there. Stillness, in this understanding, is not empty. It is revealing. When muddy water is left untouched, the sediment slowly settles and the water becomes clear on its own. The human mind behaves the same way. Constant distraction clouds perception, and stillness quietly restores it. Part 14. The Return. There is an old story of a boy kidnapped as an infant and raised among shepherds in a distant valley, believing himself poor and ordinary his whole life, though he always carried an unexplainable longing that no success could satisfy. One spring, an elderly traveler arrives carrying a sealed scroll bearing a royal insignia. Inside is the story of the young man's birth, proof that he had always been heir to a kingdom he never knew existed. The scroll does not make him a prince. It simply reminds him that he already was one. The rest of his life is not spent becoming royalty. It is spent learning how to live as what he had always been. This is the invitation every ancient tradition eventually offers. Not to become someone new, but to remember who we were before fear, pride, and the expectations of others taught us to live as someone else. Before reacting, pause. Before judging, observe. Before identifying with every passing emotion, ask quietly, who is noticing this experience? That simple question begins to reveal the calm, steady observer that lies beneath every personality. The sky, that is never damaged by passing. Storms. An old craftsman, famous for the beauty of his simple wooden bowls, was once asked by his apprentice what secret allowed his hands to create such beauty. He set down his knife and touched his own chest. "My hands did not become extraordinary," he said. "I simply stopped, allowing my heart to become divided. When the heart is whole, even the most ordinary action begins to express something eternal. The sun will rise tomorrow over cities full of hurried people. Some will keep believing peace lives somewhere outside themselves. Others will quietly begin to remember what the old teachers never stopped saying, that the deepest transformation always begins within Thesial sanctuary of awareness. One conscious life at a time. One remembered soul at a time. One quiet act of courage at a time. Remember who you are, and the world you see will begin to change with you.